happened to my grandmother. Now, I've heard similar stories as a kid around the campfire, but this one is true. My grandfather was in the Army and later the Air Force. He retired out of the military, so most of my mom's side of the family lived a large portion of their lives on base. One night, my grandma went to the bar with my grandfather. She had driven separately and left before he did. Moments after parking at their home, my grandfather came speeding up and jumped out of his car. My grandma hadn't even gotten out yet, and he had already opened her back door and pulled some drunk guy out of the car. He had been hiding in the back seat the whole way home. My grandfather was a POW and all-around badass. He beat the shit out of this guy. Good thing he knew something was wrong. My best friend was stalked in Afghanistan. I'm telling this story on behalf of my best friend Tom, who I've known since childhood and who I consider a brother. He served with the Army for several years as an infantryman with the 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. After he returned from his combat tour in Afghanistan, he had more than a few stories to tell. However, I am immensely sad to say that we lost Tom in a car accident recently. I know, sharing a story with Let's Not Meet seems like a strange way to honor someone's memory. However, there is one story from his time in Afghanistan that I've always felt merited a submission on this board. Tom agreed, as he also visited Let's Not Meet occasionally, but never quite found the time to sit down and write about his experiences. There's many stories that will forever remain between me and him, but I know this one he always wanted to share. With that in mind, I'll do my best to pass it along. I want it noted that the details are somewhat hazy. It has been some time since his last retelling. In 2013, Tom's unit was deployed to Afghanistan's Kandahar province. He was a private first class at the time and had been in the Army for a year by beginning of the tour, with the last several months of that assigned to the 1st Ranger Battalion. He had gone through immensely difficult training, up to and including jumping out of several perfectly good airplanes to get to where he was now, and as such was eager to finally do his job. He ultimately participated in 19 combat missions during his 4 months in country. All the night raids aimed at capturing high-value targets, local Taliban cell commanders, or other person of interest. You see, the Rangers and other Special Operations Forces specialize in nighttime operations. They train at night and operate frequently under the cover of darkness. The Taliban lacked widespread night vision optics, whereas each individual ranger was equipped with some of the finest NODs money could buy, and the accessories to complement them. With that advantage, on top of their large numbers and superior training, it was hard for them to not feel like they owned the night when they went out on target. However, this wasn't always the case. One night, Tom's platoon was tapped for yet another HVT raid. After the typical briefing and preparation process, the 30 or so guys boarded the Chinooks and proceeded to the large location, disembarking under the cover of darkness to secure the area. Tom was a member of a 2-man machine gun team. His team leader, Corporal Kyle, manned the M240L machine gun. As his assistant gunner, it was Tom's responsibility to carry spared linked ammunition belts, call out fire adjustments, and act as a bodyguard to the corporal and his weapon should the enemy attempt to flank them. After leaving the chopper, Tom and Kyle moved forward for their designated blocking position, a vantage point in which a fire team can set up and interdict enemy forces attempting to enter or leave a target area. The target in this case was a small village seemingly abandoned and heavily deteriorated, with crumbling masonry and multiple bombed-out huts. The entire place was incredibly unsettling, showing no signs of life other than a single black cat that slinked amongst the shadows of the buildings. The moon was high in the sky that night, bathing the ramshackle collection of seemingly ancient structures in an eerie light. After ensuring the M240L was set up, Tom surveyed the village. He ultimately focused on a damaged stone wall less than 50 meters away. There was a hole punched out in the center of it, just large enough for a man to stick his head and shoulders through. He watched the hole intently for almost the entirety of the mission. Infrared lasers lined up an M4A1 at the ready, expecting the barrel of an AK-47 to appear in any moment. It never did. The rifle teams proceeded into the village and searched it top to bottom, finding no trace of the HVT they were after, or any signs of life at all for that matter. Kyle and Tom relocated to link up with several members of a rifle squad in a large ditch over 100 meters away from the target site. They continued to watch the perimeter as discussions were being held about how to proceed. That's when all hell broke loose. One of the platoon's senior sergeants came running over, yelling at Tom and other rangers to get the fuck out of the ditch. The comms net exploded, with orders to fall back to the LZ for immediate exfiltration. Tom and Kyle were beyond confused. Had EOD picked up on something? Maybe they were all standing atop a buried IED belt, something far from unheard of. The Chinooks double-timed it back to their location and landed, allowing all of the rangers to board. After a final head count to ensure no one had been left behind, the helicopters lifted off and returned to the airfield. The mission had lasted less than an hour, seemingly ending as soon as it had begun, all without a single shot being fired and no contact with the Taliban. Or so Tom thought. After returning to base, the platoon was debriefed and the reason for the sudden scrub for the mission became very clear. Shortly after Tom and Kyle had posted up in the ditch, signals collection specialist attached to the Rangers had picked up enemy radio chatter in the vicinity of the assault force. Very clearly and calmly, the Taliban had spoken. There are 6 men in the ditch. 2 of them are manning a machine gun on the leftmost edge. They are facing the northwest. You can flank them if you follow the berm. They proceeded to list a multitude of details about the assault force and their positions. They were stalking the Rangers, hunting the hunters. Based on the chatter, it was clear that an unknown number of insurgents were setting up a potentially deadly ambush. Other than the intercepted broadcast, the Rangers had been completely unaware of their presence. None of the men on the ground had seen any indication of enemy activity. The trained K9s hadn't picked up any sense at all. The drones and Overwatch aircraft circling the area didn't see a damn thing, even with FLIR thermal vision. Yet the Taliban were listing numerous, meticulous details about the Rangers as if they were standing next to them in the darkness. It was a humbling experience for the entire platoon. For Tom, that mission always sent a shiver up his spine just to think about. Even though later ops during the same deployment involved full-scale firefights and ambushes. See you later. For starters, a little bit of background information. I spent most of 2007 in Afghanistan as a combat medic for the US Army, when our FOB, Forward Operation Base, wasn't getting mortared or rocketed. We would do these presence patrols with the Afghan National Army to let the people know that the Afghan government had a presence in the area and pretend to care about their well-being. On these patrols, we try our best to be as friendly with the locals as possible without appearing vulnerable. We were in a pretty remote area where nobody speaks English. And since none of us spoke the language there, that meant a lot of smiles, nods, and thumbs up. Even though we got attacked on the FOB quite a bit, most of the Afghans we encountered on patrol were pretty cool. Sometimes we give out candy or pencils to children, or burn a cigarette and drink chai with the local villagers. Aside from the stress that comes with living in a war zone, and the occasional zzz, I almost got my effing face shot off moment, the year passed without anything out of the ordinary for a combat deployment to be. Until just before we left. On one of our final patrols through a nearby village, just as we were leaving, one of the locals, they come up to me, grabs my arm just above my elbow, not uncommon for Afghans, and he said to me in near perfect English, "See you later, my name." Out of sheer bewilderment, shock, and terror, I smiled stupidly and just nodded as I kept walking. I couldn't believe it. He used my first and my last name. Now, my last name may have been on my uniform, but absolutely nobody ever called me by my first name. I was a medic. Usually everyone just called me Doc. As we walked off, I would turn back and he hadn't gone away anywhere, just watching us. I never saw that guy again for the short time I was in the country after that. But to say it bothered me is a heck of an understatement. It still gives me nightmares, and until very recently, I have been a social media recluse because of it.